You're listening to Simply the Best Sports Take, the best podcast breaking down the best stuff in sports with host Sean Bingham. His takes are so good, he dropped the mic, but then you wouldn't be able to hear him, and that would suck.
Welcome into STB Sports Take, Simply the Best Sports Podcast. I am your host, Sean Bingham. Thank you guys so much for joining me. We've got a packed show today, a lot of NBA talk. The NBA season gets back underway tonight. I am extremely excited. I got to come out with my power rankings. We're going to go over that. A little bit of NFL talk. And just want to say to you guys, if you are watching right now, or if you're listening, either one, I would love it if you like what you're hearing, if you like what you're seeing, if you're enjoying the show. I would love it if you guys subscribed, either on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, whatever you're listening on, and share it with somebody. You know, text the link to somebody, share it with somebody who appreciates sports, who's into sports. And if you guys want to send in your sound bites, your takes, you can do that, and I can play them within the podcast on the next show. So love you guys. Thank you for the support. Let's dive right in. So the NBA just came out with their latest defensive, power rankings, if you will. And I don't know why they even did this again, because they just did it like a week ago, and there's really been no games since then. But again, they had Ben Simmons on top and Rudy Gobert second. And I've already talked about it, so I'm just going to touch on it real briefly here. But nobody in the NBA affects the game on the defensive side of the ball like Rudy Gobert. Nobody. It's not even close, actually. I mean, I get that like Joel Embiid had that big game against him. But, something I said yesterday relating to football was I said, quarterbacks win championships, not defense. Defense is important, and I hate it when people take it to the extreme. It's like, oh, Sean doesn't think defense is important. No, I didn't say that. Defense is still important. It's not as important as quarterback play in the NFL, and in the NBA, great offense always beats great defense. We know this. The rules are set up to allow for that. In both the NFL and the NBA, the rules are set up to favor the offensive side of the ball. So it's no surprise that great offense beats great defense. And so did Joel Embiid beat Rudy Gobert in that particular matchup? Yeah, he did. Does that mean Rudy Gobert is an overrated defender? No, not at all. That's ridiculous. Rudy Gobert has the most win shares. I mean, when you compare him to Ben Simmons, especially for Defensive Player of the Year, again, they're very different positions. I get that. But Rudy Gobert is a rim protector. He is defending in a way that Ben Simmons has no chance of defending. It's a much more important form of defense. It's actual rim protection. He's altering shots. He's clogging the lane. He's keeping guys out of the lane, away from the hoop. His opponent field goal percentage differential is better than Ben Simmons. His defensive rating is better than Ben Simmons. His defensive win shares is better than Ben Simmons. There's literally nothing we can point to that says that Ben Simmons is the better defender, yet the NBA continues to push that he should be Defensive Player of the Year. I don't get it. I don't know why they even came out with the ratings, because they'd just done this a week ago, and all we've had since then was maybe one or two games and then the All-Star break. But they did it. So Joel Embiid did overtake LeBron James as the MVP favorite, so I guess they were listening to the podcast on that one. Thank you, NBA, for listening to me. So anyway, enough about that. Let's move forward. I'm excited for the NBA to get back underway tonight. I wanted to do my power rankings before that happened, so this is kind of like the mid-season power rankings. And not a ton of shifting from the last time. There is a little bit, though, some very key changes. And just so you know how I do my power rankings, to me, it's not just about what you've done this season. That's obviously a huge part of it. But it's what have you done for me lately, and what trajectory is your team on? Are you guys moving upward, or are you moving downward? What are the chances of you winning a 7-game series if the playoffs were to start today? Things like that. So a heavy focus on what have you done for me lately. And so I'm just going to do the top 10, and I'm going to start at number 10. Number 10, I have the Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets, they were underachieving for much of the early part of the season. They've been surging ever since. And last year, they obviously went to the Western Conference Finals and surprised everybody by doing that. I don't think you'll see them do that again this year. But they have been playing much better of lately. So, again, I've got them in the 10 spot. Number 9, I have the Portland Trailblazers. And the Trailblazers are surprising me. They're a team that right now is without CJ McCollum and without Yusuf Nurkic, and they're still winning. And they're winning really, really well. I think Damian Lillard is an MVP, not the favorite, but he's one of them. I had him ranked second in my MVP rankings last week when we did that. And so Damian Lillard is playing out of his mind. Carmelo Anthony's playing super well. And I think when you see CJ McCollum and Yusuf Nurkic come back, I think you're going to see the Blazers really do some damage. And I think they've got that clutch factor going for them, so I've got them at number 9. Number 8, I have the Lakers. And don't get me wrong, I still think at full strength, the Lakers are one of the favorites. We're going to get into that here in a second. But right now, they're showing that without Anthony Davis, they are below average. They're not even average. They are below average. They're close to garbage. They're 3-7 in their last 10. They're absolutely reeling without Anthony Davis. I think he'll come back. I think with LeBron James and on the team, you're going to make the playoffs and potentially do some damage, and and maybe a first round victory. I don't know. I honestly probably not. Actually, without Anthony Davis, they'll make the playoffs, but I don't think they'd get out of the first round in the West without him. And so the chances of him coming back, of course, are very high. Vegas odds are still putting the Lakers number 1. But barely above the Nets. We're going to get into that as well. But anyway, I've got the Lakers 8th because 3-7 in your last 10, showing that you can't win without Anthony Davis. That's not impressive. That's not the direction you want to be heading. They're too reliant on one guy, and right now that guy's not playing. So they're in at 8. The Heat, I have the Heat at number 7. And the Heat obviously are coming off of a finals appearance last year, and that finals, the whole season last year in the bubble and the playoffs in the bubble, I loved watching from a fan perspective. I love that they gave us something to enjoy during the pandemic, especially at that time when quarantines and stay-at-home orders and things like that were more intensified. It gave us entertainment that we needed. So I loved watching the games. I loved being entertained. But the whole idea of the bubble and crowning a champion within that arrangement, to me, was just, I didn't love it. So I don't know that the Heat were actually the best team in the East last year. Sure, they got to the finals. That whole season, though, I'm just kind of somewhat discarding it. It's kind of like there's a huge asterisk next to that season. But that being said, they're still playing really well, especially, again, like I say, lately. The Miami Heat have been playing really well lately. They've won also 7 of their last 10. And so they're kind of surging. They had some injuries. They didn't have much off season to get ready and get healthy. So them at number 7. At number 6, I have the 76ers. Now, this might seem like a slight because of my Jazz allegiances and the blossoming rivalry between these two teams from separate conferences with Ben Simmons, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Joel Embiid. It's kind of fun. But this is not 76er hate. This is just how I actually feel. They're 6-4 in their last 10. I get that they're in first place in the East. There's 0% chance they finish in first place in the East. The Nets will overtake them probably by the end of this week, if we're being honest. And so the 76ers will not finish first in the East. I don't think they'll even make the Eastern Conference Finals. I think you'll see, depending on matchups, but I think you'll see the Nets and the Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals. So do I think the 76ers are a good team? Yes, I do. Do I think they're true title contenders? No, I do not. Okay, so at number 5, then I do have the Bucks. The Bucks. The Bucks have been underachieving this year, you could argue, but they're still playing well. They're 6-4 in their last 10. Their point differential is actually the best in the Eastern Conference. Behind them is the Nets, and then the 76ers are third in point differential. And I'm a huge fan of point differential. It tells a much broader story of just how much better you are than your opponents on average on any given night. And so the Bucks are the best in the East in that category. I think you'll see that also flip, and you'll see the Nets take over that over the next coming few weeks. But I've got the Bucks at number 5. At number 4, I have the Clippers, and this was an interesting one because the Clippers on paper are phenomenal. Like you look at them on paper, and you've got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and Patrick Beverley and Serge Ibaka, and they've got these Lou Williams. Like, they've just got so many players, it feels like. But then they get to the playoffs last year, and again, I get it. It's in the bubble. I don't want to contradict myself and ding them too hard for their playoff performance. But I just don't know if I believe in the Clippers. you can't knock them too far down your list because they do have so much talent and they are winning a lot of games. They're currently 4th in the West. They do have a losing record in their last 10. So in the whole "what have you done for me lately" scenario, they're 4-6 in their last 10. But I just don't know if I believe in the Clippers. And we're going to get into that more on why I think that the Jazz actually in a 7-game series should be able to beat the Clippers. But anyway, I'll get into that in a second. I've got them at number 4. At number 3, I have the Phoenix Suns. Now, these guys, this is an interesting one because this is a team that didn't even make the playoffs last year. They add Chris Paul, the whole Chris Paul effect that I've talked about. I'm not Chris Paul's biggest fan, but I absolutely will acknowledge and respect what he does to bring a winning culture to teams year after year throughout his career. He's done this from his rookie season with the Hornets all the way through, or the Bobcats, whichever one they were then, all the way through to today with the Phoenix Suns. Every team he goes to, the Hornets/Bobcats, the Clippers, the Rockets, the Thunder, and now with the Suns, he just takes the teams and they immediately, when adding him, they improve from what they had done previously. And when he leaves, they drop right back down. And so to me, they have a real shot at winning at least a first round series. So I've got them, and by the way, they are number 2 in the entire NBA in point differential, behind only the Utah Jazz. So in the entire league, the number 2 point differential is the Phoenix Suns, and nobody's talking about them. And they have the talent. Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker, those are 3 studs, honestly. It's not a big 3 not a Kawhi and PG, but a Kyrie, a James Harden, and a KD. It's not that type of big 3. But those are 3 studs in Phoenix, and they've got a veteran leader now who's teaching them how to win, and it's working. 8-2 in their last 10, winners of 4 straight, second best record in the West, and second best point differential in the entire league. So they actually have the second best record in the entire league as well. They're a half game ahead of the 76ers for that. So the Suns at number 3. At number 2, I have the Jazz. And the Jazz, while they have the best record in the NBA, they have the highest point differential in the NBA, they are 6-4 in their last 10, which is still a winning record, but they had that bad kind of road trip there before the All-Star break. And if I'm being honest, if we're putting the Jazz up against the Nets right now in a 7-game series, you'd be crazy to not put your money on the Nets. And that's even without Kevin Durant, unfortunately. To me, the Nets are head and shoulders above the rest of the Eastern Conference, and they might actually be my favorite to win the title. I know I've said that the Lakers at full strength with Anthony Davis are my favorites, but the more I think about it, the more I look at the numbers, I'm just not sure if I'm there. And there's an interesting stat that came out, and it was I saw it on ESPN, and they said that the last 20 years, the defensive rating, this was basically the ESPN's way of saying the Nets don't have a chance to win, right? They can't do it. They got to play more defense, which they do. They do need to step up their defense a little bit. And again, going back to defense wins championships versus does it really, they said that in the last 20 seasons, no NBA champion had been lower than 11th on defensive rating. So I looked into all this, and I just thought, okay, that's fine. But what about offensive rating? What about point differential? What about some of these other things? And in defensive rating, so I looked up it through the last 10 seasons because the game has evolved a lot. There's a lot more three-point shots being chucked up. The rules continue to shift in favor of the offense. And so I just went through the last 10 seasons. And in the last 10 seasons, it is true, all the champions, of course, have been top 11. All of them are actually top 10 or better, with the exception of the Warriors in 2018, who finished 11th in defensive rating. But they were third that year in offensive rating, the Warriors were. In offensive rating, well, guess what? The champs have also finished in the top 10 for every year of the last 10 years in offensive rating, with the exception of last year's Lakers, who were third in defensive rating. So again, and they were 11th in offensive rating. So again, you've got 2 exceptions to offensive rating, defensive rating. All the champions of the last 10 years for each of those categories finished in the top 10, with the exception of the Warriors in 2018, who were 11th in defensive rating, but they were third in offensive rating. And then it was flipped for last year's Lakers. They were 11th in offensive rating and third in defensive rating. So it doesn't really matter that much to me that the Nets aren't in the top 10 right now. They're like down at like 26th or something like that for defensive rating. But what does matter is the defensive offensive differential. So points per possession, because if your offense is so outrageously good that you can allow giving up a few more points, just like those 2018 Warriors did, it doesn't matter that much. And so you can't go clear to the end of the spectrum of like a Mike D'Antoni Houston Rockets. That's not going to work. And that's where the scare comes in with these Nets, is it's like, well, you've got Harden playing there, and Harden was on those Rockets teams, but he's playing differently. He's playing more unselfishly, and James Harden to me is being more impressive this season than he's ever been, and I hope that he continues to play that way when Kevin Durant comes back and take an even bigger backseat. I think you're going to have to see Kyrie Irving do even more so of that. But point differential, getting back to that, so the differential, offensive rating, defensive rating, and how those ratings work, by the way, is it takes 100 possessions and it just averages it out. It says, look, this is how many points this team gives up per 100 possessions. This is how many points they score per 100 possessions. And that's how you get your offensive, defensive rating. And then the differential is obviously the really crucial one, because if you're phenomenal on offense but really sucky on defense, you're probably going to end up somewhere in the middle. And same vice versa. And that's why you see champions being pretty well-rounded. But there are some exceptions, and that's kind of the point here. And so in the differential, and I'm going to pull this up here. So right now in the differential, the Utah Jazz are first. The Phoenix Suns are second. The Bucks third. Nuggets fourth. And then you go Clippers, Nets, Lakers. And those are kind of the three teams that everyone thinks are the best: Clippers, Nets, and Lakers. And so the Brooklyn Nets, while they're so bad on defense, they are first on offense, very, very first. And their defense, I'm just looking it up now to get the exact. I was right. It was 26th. So they're 26th on defense. So think about that. They're so low on defense, but their offense is so great, it rises them to 6th overall. And guess what? Of the last 10 champions, every single one of them has been not in the top 10 for differential, but in the top 5. Every single one, with the exception of the Dallas Mavericks, which was 10 years ago, the farthest one back that I went, and they were 8th. And that was the team that basically, I don't want to say they got lucky because they earned it, but they upset the choking Heat. LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, their first finals appearance. They choked away. They were heavy, heavy favorites. They were far and away the best team, but they lost to the Mavericks, and that's the only team of the last 10 years who didn't finish in the top 5 in that net rating, offensive, defensive rating, the net difference, and they were still 8th. They were still 8th in that. And so, to me, that is a far more telling stat. And Vegas is telling us right now, and the Vegas odds, which are so fun to look at because it's actually really funny. If you want to do power rankings, just go look at where the money. Always just follow the money. Vegas has the Lakers as the favorites at a plus 260, which means if you bet $100, you'd get 360 back. Okay, that's how that works. So you'd get 260 more above 100. So the Lakers are plus 260. The Nets are plus 270. So the Nets are right there with the Lakers. So Vegas is telling us, look, if Anthony Davis comes back, which we think he will, they're still the favorites. And we do think Anthony Davis will come back. They're probably also telling you they're not quite sure of the chemistry that's going to happen when Kevin Durant comes back. These are all the same things that I talk about. Next, they have the Clippers. Then they have the Jazz. Then the Bucks. That's your top 5. And there's a big gap between the top 2, Lakers and Nets, and then the Clippers. What's interesting, though, to me, is that in the top 4, you have 3 teams from the West. That tells you just how much Vegas believes that the Nets are going to sprint through the Eastern Conference playoffs. Because the Bucks are a plus 900, the Nets are a plus 270. That is a humongous difference. And the truth is they're right. There's a huge gap in the East between the Nets and everybody else. And so the Nets are probably going to get to the NBA Finals well-rested, ready to rock, And then in the West, you've got Lakers, Clippers, Jazz. Yeah, we'll see how the Suns and Nuggets and some of these other teams do, but I think if the Jazz were to go up right now against the Los Angeles Clippers, and even if it's not right now, even if it's in the playoffs, a couple months from now, I think the Jazz win. And on paper, I get it. I get that people think so. Again, I would flop those. I would say the Jazz have the third best chance, and I hope I'm right. It'd be really fun. But to me, Paul George is the difference. Paul George had not, until last year, when they were favorites to win the entire thing, until last year, Paul George had not been out of the first round since 2014. He has a history of underachieving in the playoffs, and to me, that would be the difference for the Utah Jazz. The Jazz play like a team, the ultimate team. They've got 6 guys that average double figures. 6 guys on the team average double figures. You've got a humongous spark plug in Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench, who I would say at this point has overtaken Lou Williams. Jordan Clarkson's the runaway favorite for Sixth Man of the Year, and he's a better version of Lou Williams at this point. Donovan Mitchell is more clutch than Paul George. Kawhi Leonard, it's kind of up in the air. Rudy Gobert is the rim protector. Bogdanovich can shoot lights out. And again, but to me, it comes down to Paul George. I just don't know if I believe in Paul George winning big games. And so I looked at the clutch factor. So again, with all these ratings currently right now, the Jazz are third in defensive rating in the NBA. The Clippers are 17th. So everyone looks at the Clippers as like this defensive powerhouse, right? This juggernaut. They've got Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Patrick Beverley. Well, guess what? We can't get fooled by names, okay? The numbers speak for themselves. They are 17th, which is below average for defensive rating this season. The Jazz are third. Then you go on to offensive rating. The Clippers are the Clippers are second. The Jazz are third. So they're neck and neck. Clippers slightly better on offensive rating. Huge difference in defensive rating. Clippers slightly better offensive rating. Point differential, the rating differential, Jazz are first. Clippers are fifth. And over the last 10 seasons, we've basically learned you have to be in the top 5 in that differential if you want to win a title. Right now, the Clippers, Jazz are both right there. Nets and Lakers are on the outside looking in. I think you're going to see that shift as Kevin Durant comes back, as more chemistry happens, as Anthony Davis comes back. I'm sure they'll both finish in the top 5. But I think right now, I truly believe that the Utah Jazz would beat the Los Angeles Clippers in a 7-game series, especially if they have home court advantage and we can get some fans back in there. That would be a huge difference. But to me, playoff P, it's more like layoff P because there's no P. He does not show up. The P is missing in the playoffs, and he should be laid off by the Clippers. It's layoff P. And that's not Paul George hate. It's just he hasn't proven that he can be a clutch player. And that's another thing I looked at was clutch ratings. And I don't really love the clutch rating when it comes to individual play because basically how they do the clutch stats is if the game is within 5 points or fewer with 5 minutes or less remaining, that's considered that's clutch time according to the NBA stat. I don't really love that for trying to prove individual clutchness, because some guy getting a dunk when ahead by 3 with 4.5 minutes left, I don't really view that as clutch. Certainly not as clutch as hitting a 3 when you're down 2 at the buzzer, okay? But they're kind of weighted the same in this clutch play stat for individuals. Where I do think it matters, though, is in team play. Because what it is it's like when teams can flip a switch, when they can almost just stop messing around and in that last 5 minutes be like, hey, look, guys, like let's get going here. Let's win this game. And in clutch play, last year the Jazz were second, Clippers were 9th. This year the Jazz are 10th, Clippers are 24th. They have a losing record in games where that's within 5 points with five minutes or less to go. And I think that's a telling stat. I don't think they can close. I don't think they have a closer. The Jazz, obviously, their best closer is going to be Donovan Mitchell, and he's a clear-cut closer. Sometimes I think it's important to have a clear-cut closer. That's something that I think the Nets are potentially going to struggle with, is it should be Kevin Durant, but is Kyrie Irving going to be able to swallow his pride and let Kevin Durant take that driver's seat there in the last few minutes? That doesn't mean one guy gets all the shots, but don't force shots up. Share the ball, spread the ball, move the ball, and gear your offense around your best player who gives you the best chance to win. And with the Jazz, it's very clear. It's Donovan Mitchell. Sometimes he shoots the Jazz to victories, and sometimes he shoots them right out of games. So I would take Donovan Mitchell in clutch time over Paul George. I would probably take Donovan Mitchell just in general over Paul George. I would not take him over Kawhi Leonard. I would not take him in clutch time over Kawhi Leonard. I think Kawhi Leonard has proven to be clutch. He was not as good last year in last year's playoffs. Again, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon there, but he started really becoming clutch with the Spurs, and it continued with the Raptors. I've said before, and I stand by it, there's no way he wins that championship against the Warriors if KD and Klay Thompson stay healthy, but they didn't. And the Raptors won, and so he's a two-time Finals MVP. So to me, Kawhi Leonard is a better player than Donovan Mitchell, but he's just one guy. And you go down the line, you look at all these other things, and a guy like Paul George can shoot you out of games, and the Jazz have a great rim protector, phenomenal three-point shooting, great ball movement. They're kind of honestly like the Spurs that Kawhi Leonard was on when they beat the Heat in 2014, and Kawhi was MVP of that finals as well for stopping LeBron James. It's funny how many guys have been finals MVP for stopping LeBron James when really LeBron got all of his regular numbers, led the series in points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, everything, but somehow he was stopped. And Iggy gets finals MVP or Kawhi gets MVP. Kawhi did play really well that series. He averaged over 20 a game, but he also had Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili as teammates, but I digress. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the STB current midseason NBA power rankings. Nets at the top, Jazz in the 2 spot, and then from there we go Suns, Clippers, Bucks, Sixers, Heat, Lakers, Blazers, Nuggets. And one last thing before we go, had an interesting thing. There's been a lot of talk about this Dak Prescott stuff and the massive contract he got. He obviously won the negotiation. He's second highest paid quarterback in history, and he's never been MVP. Don't think he's ever even got an MVP vote. Never been to a Super Bowl. He's won one playoff game. He definitely won the negotiation, but the market's going that way, and so he did deserve the money at the same time because the numbers are there. The wins in the regular season have been there. They haven't been recently in his last couple seasons. But when you look at what the market's telling you and where the market's going, he does deserve that money. I had a friend, though, yesterday who said something really, really interesting, and that was he has this theory that maybe Jerry Jones dragged it out like this on purpose because Jerry Jones is a businessman. He's a billionaire businessman who wants and needs the Dallas Cowboys to stay in the national and even international spotlight. And drama sells. Drama really, really sells. I mean, here we are talking about it. Everybody's talking about it. And maybe, just maybe, Jerry Jones did this on purpose to drag it out, keep all this chatter about the Cowboys, keep them in the spotlight, and then laugh his way all the way to the bank, knowing that he was going to do this all along to Dak Prescott and get him paid, So I don't know if I buy that theory, but it was an interesting one that actually kind of made sense from a business perspective. Like, hey, keep the drama around your team because ultimately what you care most about is money, if that's the case with Jerry Jones. Not going to say he cares more about that than winning, but he is a businessman. And he is a billionaire businessman. Not a horrible theory. Anyway, that's all the time I have for today. You guys are awesome. Please share the podcast and please subscribe. I am out. Peace.
Thanks for hanging with Simply the Best Sports Take. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and check out STBSportsTake.com. Simply the best in sports. 'Cause we are